Thanks, Addison. So we're doing something slightly unusual today, which is that just the way the advisory committee fell, we're going to kind of go back and use the content from last month's board meeting because those topics are following through into this month. So the actual decks are slides you may have already seen if you've been to if you watched or came to the board meeting in November. But we're not going to walk through those in painful detail. What we want to do is hit some highlights of what we were presenting and two topics for conversation with this group today. One is our facility strategy. We have about $25 million. We have a fairly exciting and complicated strategy for distributing those funds. So an opportunity for us to share with you kind of a focus on how we're approaching the distribution of those funds, how we're collecting information right now. I think maybe a public apology about a little confusion on the RFI for our family child care work, and get some feedback on sort of that. And then we want to talk about rates. And again, we did a pretty in-depth presentation to the board, a lot of background for our board members, especially the new ones, on sort of the context and restrictions around rate setting. We're not going to focus again on that full detail. We'll do a quick highlight of some of the most relevant and then focus on the discussion. And I'm going to share verbally what we're intending to present at the board meeting around rates on Wednesday, so that you all have a chance to kind of marinate in some of the thinking that the agency's been doing. Just want to say in advance that I'm really excited about the opportunity for this rate reform and increase. I think it's going to be a game changer, and it's a real opportunity for us to bring a level of equity and bring the cost data that we've contracted for into the discussion and sort of change the trajectory around our rate setting going forward. So excited about that conversation as well. Sound good? All right. I think I'm turning over to Jocelyn and Jose to start. And again, I think highlights a focus of sort of what the strategy is around facilities today, this year, and potentially going forward. Also want to recognize I had the opportunity to meet with the CDAC and the Children's Investment Fund Board this week. So really digging deeply into partnership with them around facilities planning and visioning, but also just the operations of the program. We've gotten a lot of feedback from many of you who've participated about the importance of sort of bringing the same philosophy of a user-centered design and sort of taking away barriers and focusing on how to make it a much more accessible program. And so we're working in partnership with CIF and CDAC around doing those things. Amy, I know you're the chair of the board. I don't know if you want to come off mute and say something about that.
Sure. It was great to have you and Jose join us. I think we're excited to think about kind of how to best align support and think about the future. It is exciting to think about the resources. We also did talk about the challenges of kind of like a year by year getting funding out, kind of all that's required for facilities. But we're really excited that we had the conversation and look forward to working together.
Terrific. All right. So most of you are aware if you watched the board meeting. If you're not, we'll give you a quick recap that on the facilities side of the world, we have $25 million in the final FY24 budget. The board has sent out for public comment, and if you haven't already weighed in, that would be great. Regulations that would allow us to permanently continue large-scale grants and smaller-scale grants, both of which seem to be important for us to build the field and support the facilities needs around kids and families and our educators. We have application out on the street right now for the smaller grants. For the first time, for-profit programs that serve a high portion of low-income children are eligible to apply. And we will be soon posting an application for large-scale grants, which will still be limited to the nonprofits. And we have an RFI out on the street, which is really intended to get information about potential intermediaries. But I know we have a lot of family child care providers who've been directly trying to kind of weigh in on that process, which has been a little bit frustrating. So, all right, let me turn it over to the team to give you a quick kind of ground you in the facts about what we're doing, and then we'll open it back up for discussion. Jocelyn and Jose, take it away.
Yeah, I'm just going to pass it off to Jose.
Great. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know, Jose Mendez, Director of Child Care Business and Facilities for the EEC. I'm just going to be reviewing some items. I know the Commissioner had already mentioned, but I promise I'll just go light touch and we'll go into the painful details. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the slide is just about the general background of the EEOST program. It's been in existence since 2013. We're authorized to administer $50 million in funds for grants for eligible facilities. And we have a requirement that 50% of those slots in the facilities are required to serve low-income families. And so since 2013, we've awarded $58 million and helped fund about 130 projects. Next slide, please. So as you can tell, this past fiscal year, we had $8.5 million sent out, and obviously we to a number of organizations spread out across the Commonwealth. All these organizations combined have about 22,541 slots, which is what the impact will be for the various projects across these organizations. Next slide, please. So moving forward to FY24. We are moving forward with a hybrid approach. As the Commissioner mentioned, we're doing small grants and we're doing large grants. And we are also opening up the small grants to for-profit entities. But as a reminder, even the for-profit entities are still required to be eligible to serve 50% of their enrollment has to be low income or families who can access a public subsidy. And again, as the Commissioner already mentioned, we have an RFI posted. We're actively getting feedback and commentary about how to move forward to support FCCs. Next slide, please. So some improvements that we're making for this year. For all the grants, we're allowing electronic application submission and accepting electronic signatures. This past fiscal year, there was a requirement to submit paper documents and wet signatures. So we're changing that. We're expanding eligible use to incorporate security upgrades. We're going to be thinking about a focus of clean energy and decarbonization as part of the administration's whole government approach. We're also amending some of the priorities to support geographic distribution and first-time applicants and make sure that basically the funding gets spread out across the state as much as possible. And we're going to be reviewing grant closing procedures and trying to streamline that. For the smaller scale grants, we've removed the limitation for prior awardees. So an organization can apply again, even if they have been awarded in the prior year. We're allowing them also to apply for multiple sites. And then, as the Commissioner mentioned, we're opening it up to for-profit programs. But again, those for-profit programs are still going to be required to have 50% of the enrollment access 50 public subsidy to be eligible. Next slide, please. So for FCC capital funding, the RFI was intended to figure out how to best support effective capital project management, what the technical assistance would be that would be needed, and also thinking about ways to support homeownership. As I mentioned, we had the info session, but we're actively collecting feedback and questions and commentary, and we're looking forward to submissions from organizations that have experience supporting multiple FCCs, such as FCC networks and systems. Next slide, please. And so to move forward with this hybrid approach and to ensure that we're able to move forward for the foreseeable future, some regulatory action was required to amend the current regulations to allow the Commissioner to shorten the length of time for the EEOST grant, to adjust the grant recapture terms, as well as to waive requirements around recorded mortgage lien land use. And what this essentially amounts to is that it's going to allow us to continue to offer small grant opportunities and large grant opportunities. And we're hoping to present the final regulatory revisions for the board in January. Right, next slide. I'm not sure who I'm handing it off to next, actually.
Well, why don't we stop sharing and have a discussion a little bit? So I want to ask Eugenia to come on. We hosted a number of sessions around input, drop-in sessions, both for for-profits and nonprofits and for family childcare. I think we had more than 3,000 people participate. So I don't know if that was an over outreach on our part, but or and also reflects, I think, the high demand and interest in facilities development. So Eugenia, do you want to talk a little bit about the drop-in sessions, and then we are happy to kind of open up to any thoughts or questions or needs for clarification regarding the current. And let me, after Eugenia's done, I'm just going to come back and say something else about family childcare. All right, go ahead, Eugenia.
Yes, as the commissioner said, we had a huge amount of attendance for all 6 of the drop-in sessions we held. One on 3 days at 11 o'clock and then at 6:30 p.m. Our 6:30 p.m. ones were basically double the size of all the daytime ones, which is really wonderful to see. And I think particularly we saw a huge number of family childcare educators showing up, sharing what they need, and letting us all know about how excited they are for the opportunity to submit a proposal for a capital grant that they could invest into their program. We are getting all those videos up online. So in the link that I put in the chat, we have the first session up there, but the rest of them will be up there too, so folks can watch back if you did miss it. And I know some of you attended those sessions too and had thoughtful questions for us to break back, but we're trying to think of other ways we can make the process clear. The center-based is a little bit more clear. We have one for-profit and nonprofit programs to apply for. And the RFI, I think, has been a little confusing for folks because they're ready to go and apply for the grant today. And we're still working on getting our ducks in a row and finding the right partners to support that kind of work. So it's been wonderful to see the interest, and the comments have been so helpful. And as Jose was saying as well, we'll be sorting through those comments and trying to bring all that into our thinking going forward.
Thanks, Eugenia. Yeah, so just reiterating, like so the request for information we put out was really around who can be our partner. So we have CDAC and SIF, who has been our partner on the center-based side. New money there. CDAC well-positioned to help us move additional funding, additional eligibility for nonprofit programs through the center-based world. We don't have a similar partner identified or naturally existing right now that we know of in the Commonwealth. So the purpose of that RFI was to identify who might play that role for us in administering capital funds and being able to work with the unique needs of family child care providers. So the purpose of that RFI was to find partner who would understand, or partners potentially, who would understand and be able to do that. I think the demand and need for support for childcare facilities development within the family childcare community, which we're obviously totally committed to and excited about, is so high that we had family childcare providers themselves participating and trying to respond to the RFI, but it's not a perfect match. So we're going to try and do some communication to make sure, you know, when we are able to move forward around an intermediary, one of their first responsibilities will be to reach out directly to family childcare community to ask what their needs are, so that as they design the program, it'll be consistent with the goals that we want for our family childcare providers and based on the needs that they're expressing. I mean, we've started by thinking about home ownership and, you know, what it looks like to do facilities development and rental. You know, it's just a very different kind of approach than our center-based approach. So I'm going to stop there and we'll just see, Helen, we'll start with you. And then if there's other questions or comments or thoughts for the agency about how we can best sort of communicate the intentions, even if we didn't quite get the mechanisms right.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Helen.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you're using the MSBA for any technical assistance in this, because they certainly have a lot of experience. They do early childhood schools. and do support, if you have a program in early childhood, they'll support that through the public schools. So I don't know, they may be helpful in some technical assistance.
It's a great suggestion. You know, we haven't worked as collaboratively, but as more districts and community partnerships are forming around universal access to early childhood, or at least pre-K, I did have a conversation with the urban superintendents, and the issue of facilities came up. So I think our collaboration with MSB, with the school building authority, is going to be really critical, so that we're working in concert as they're developing new facilities. And I think, you know, making sure that we're also maximizing the community-based settings before we're investing in brand new early childhood facilities in the schools too, I think is a big priority for, at least for EEC. So that's
I think there's enough for everybody out there.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Helen. So we'll make sure to follow up on that.
If you need any, you know, if I can be of any help, I'm happy to.
Great, thank you. Amy, go ahead.
I would just add, I think so many of these like questions and how does this work in family childcare came up, as you know, we saw some of it during COVID about kind of the business side of things. So I just really want to acknowledge that, you know, to help untangle, figure some of this out is going to be really important. And so I think kind of being in this, as you said earlier this week, a learning stance to figure out what the support and looks like for all these different settings. But I think the commitment is clearly there to try to figure this out. But it's probably going to be not like a kind of straightforward, like apply and figure out the money. It's really going to be about learning and so many of the kind of embedded technicalities, I won't say challenges, but just the differences in all these different settings. And Helen, your idea about the school building authority is wonderful. We've talked also with legislators as they do think about facilities, like how can we learn those lessons? What does it look like? We also know what we've learned from the Children's Investment Fund is like the technical assistance and support that's required for programs is intense. You know, most directors are not you know, program building developers. So making sure that resources are going to places that are ready for it and just understand, you know, and rehousing where kids might be, you know, there's a lot to it. So I just really appreciate the learning stance. I just wanted to say that here as well.
Thanks, Amy. I really appreciate that. Yes, we are definitely in a continuous learning.
So do they, I'm sorry, can I ask another question? For these grants, do you have to do public bidding, and do you have to do prevailing wage and all that? I'm sorry, maybe that's not.
For the
Yeah,
we
will-
Because it's public
yeah,
money,
it
I just don't.
is public. Well, we'll just put family childcare aside for a second, because we haven't
Yeah.
totally figured out
Yeah.
the strategy. You know, on the center-based side, it is a competitive bid process. I don't know about the prevailing wage. It's interesting. Jose, do you?
You know, I can't speak to that immediately.
That one is new to me. We use competitive procurements to, you know, competitive grant process, competitive procurements, typically to address those.
Yeah, but they're going to be using some sort of construction company. And the question is, do they have to pay prevailing
I
wage?
see what
Or,
you're saying. Yeah, thanks for
you know,
clarifying.
when they put it
Yeah.
out to bid? I just don't know how it works. You know, I know with the MSBA, you have to. You know, and public schools have to, or towns and
Oh, I
cities.
got it. You're talking about how they get the contractor versus how we procure and get the
Yes,
grants.
yes,
Right.
yeah.
Entities.
Because
I mean-
it jacks up the price, obviously.
Yeah.
But too, when you're doing something.
I don't know, but these are public funds that are authorized through the capital investment plan for the state and
Mhm.
follow OSD rules. So my guess is we would, that requirement exists too, but Jose, we can certainly clarify that.
And just one other thought. So for furniture and equipment, there's a state list that has already been, you know, vetted in terms of low price, etc. Will the centers be able to access that? That might be something you could find out through MSBA.
Yeah, okay, we'll do that as well. Some of the providers who've participated may know better than we do.
Right.
All right, anything else on facilities, the facilities plan and strategy, and where we are in the learning curve.
Can you just, what's the timeline? So the RFI is out for family childcare. So a little bit of the timeline maybe.
Yeah, Jose, can I ask you to do that?
Sure, yeah, the timeline for the RFI, sorry, before I misquote dates, give me a moment. So it's out right now, we're accepting comments. I believe the deadline for questions is December 8th. And if you give me a moment, let me just clarify the other dates here.
Yeah, and I think while Jose is looking for dates, just to set so there's this first process of determining who will play the CDAC type role in working with family childcare. And I'll just call out, I know one thing that the team has been thinking very carefully about is both the nature of the grants and what, sort of how the grants go out, what they're used for, as well as the types of technical assistance and support that are needed. That's going to be a really important part of the success in this. That's something that we're just very interested in thinking through and trying to get right. So first step will be using a competitive procurement process to get somebody on board, or maybe multiple entities on board to play that intermediary role. And then we would get to the point where we would be actually getting grants out to programs using them to support us in doing that.
I have a question, and I apologize if this was explained earlier. I missed it. What's like the minimum you're looking at for like the smaller grant awards? Has there been a discussion of like a lower limit?
So the
so
limit right now is between 2 and 500,000.
Right, but you're looking at lowering that, correct?
That is the lowered amount. It used to be
Oh, I see.
just, yeah, they used to be just large size grants, and it was a COVID adaptation to the program to make the smaller grants, which have been very important and popular. And that's what we're intending to maintain. The numbers have moved around a little bit, but in the current, and it's not in statute, so we have some flexibility, but right, this year's grants, the small size ones are between 2 and 500,000 for center-based.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification.
And I went ahead and posted in the comments the opening closings for the RFI, as well as the EOST and the EEC PCG opportunity.
Thanks, Jose. Okay, let's get on to the big show. We're going to talk about rates. Most of you are aware, I'm going to turn it over to Jocelyn and Amy Checkaway to kind of walk through, but we have been on, I would say, more than an 18-month, agency's been on a multiple year, maybe longer, journey around really looking at how we set our rates and really working on how to create a more equitable system, how to bring in cost as opposed to just price. So we are going to walk through kind of a level the playing field, remind everyone sort of the things that we've been working on, the constructs that we operate under, and then share the principles of how we're approaching the rate increase and reforms this year. And then I'll talk a little bit about what we're intending to present to the board on Wednesday. Okay.
Great, thanks. So I think I start, and I'm going to go, we have some introductory slides here, but I think that many of these slides were really designed to support the board in understanding the nuts and bolts of the child care financial assistance system, which I think most people on this call are familiar with. So really highlighting that we have the system, it supports families across early education and out of school time programs in affording childcare. So, helping everybody understand what the structure of the financial assistance is. It pays for part of the tuition, and we set a rate, and we use that rate to structure our payments to programs. And that rate varies across the program type, the child's age, the location of care, and the type of care. Go to the next slide. And we use a significant amount of federal funding to support the rate coming from the Child Care Development Block Grant Act of 2014. And there are requirements that come with that money in terms of how we use it. And one important principle that these requirements are structured around is the principle of equal access. So ensuring that families have access, fair access to the market, because again, they're taking, in many cases, vouchers and going and finding a program that will take this voucher that comes with the rate that we've set. And it's important that the rate is set at a level that allows families that is not so low that programs don't want to accept it largely. And the primary mechanism over the past years has been this market rate study that I think we're all familiar with talking about, whereby the state periodically every 3 years reviews the rates that programs are charging across the full market of childcare programs. And then from that, you can benchmark out of the full range of rates, what do our rates have to be at to match the rate that 50% of programs, for example, are charging, so that then we're at the 50th percentile of the market. And the goal being, the basic logic of that is where you set that is likely to reflect the percentage of the market that families can access. OCC, the Office of Child Care that regulates this or sort of manages this process, has set the 70th percentile as a goal for states. But what they also do is then they will set minimum thresholds that they expect states to meet. So we're going to talk about both of those pieces as we go through the presentation. At the same time, there's recognition that one of the problems with the market rate, and market rates do not always directly reflect the actual cost of running a program, and that thinking about setting reimbursement rates, it's really important to also be thinking about the actual cost of the care and understanding the cost of the care. So there is an opportunity now, which we will also talk about, for states to propose, rather than using the market rate, to do an analysis, which Massachusetts has done and plans to continue to do, to understand the true cost of care, and then to integrate that understanding into the rate setting process. Go to the next slide. So as I said, we have been conducting market rate surveys because as required. And we did find in the most recent one that was conducted in 2022 that there are some of our rates that fall below the 50th percentile, which is now the sort of minimum threshold goal that the federal government has been talking about. And that this is true for many regions, age groups, and provider types, or was true. And we also noticed that rates really range pretty broadly from the 14th percentile to the 60th percentile for center-based programs and 7th to 61st percentile for family child care providers. Can you go to the next slide? So in response to that, we implemented a historic $80 million rate increase that included across the board raises for all regions, age groups, and types of care. We recognize that costs continue to grow, particularly recently, and we wanted to make sure we were reflecting and responding to that growth across all programs. But we also wanted to bring up the bottom effectively of where some of those rates stood in relationship to the market rate. So we also targeted rate increases for certain regions, age groups, and types of care to ensure that all rates met or exceeded the 30th percentile of the market rate. But at the same time, the board, back in 2022, the board directed us to continue the work on understanding costs and use both the market rate and the cost information to assess the regional rate structure, the overall underlying structure of our rates, as well as how to adjust them going forward and think about rates going forward to accommodate both ensuring families equitable access to the market, but also making sure that we're funding programs at a level that allow programs to cover their cost. And we are in the process of proposing an alternative methodology for future work around rates. Any questions on that before I pass it off to Amy to share kind of where we're going now with our thinking? All right, you can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Hi, everyone. So this table shows our current rates after the large rate increase that Jocelyn just mentioned by region, age group, and provider type. And you can see in parentheses where that leaves us right now in terms of the percentile of the market rate below each dollar rate. The green shading in this table indicates that we do have rates that are currently at or above the 50th percentile, a little bit over half, which does really show significant progress, again, with the historic rate increase, even before we think about this year. Just as some context, in 2008, only 3% of Massachusetts rates were above the 50th percentile. Now we're up to over half. And I think this table is also really helpful in terms of showing just the notable variation in rates generally and also across regions. So, for example, if you look at our Western region, our Southeastern rates for an infant, they're substantially lower than the greater Boston area. And as I'll talk about in a minute, the costs are not nearly as different in terms of what it takes to sort of operate a program. Next slide, please. Although we have made significant progress, as I just said, a number of our rates are still below the 50th percentile of the market rate. And in this past spring, the federal government made clear that the 50th percentile is a really important threshold for states who are still using market rates as their sort of approved methodology to reach. Although we are looking to move forward with an alternative methodology. Part of our approach this year, before we receive approval for that, is to also continue to attend to where we are in terms of percentile market rate. Next slide, please. So since the spring, we have achieved some really significant milestones that are informing our approach to setting rates and thinking about our rate structure with the increase that we will be able to make this year. First, as I think many of you know, we have been really focused on sort of engaging in and completing and publishing a comprehensive cost study in partnership with the Center for Early Learning Funding Equity. That has been enormously useful in sort of informing our strategy with rates as well as larger strategic financing decisions. Next, as I mentioned, we did submit a proposal to the federal government to move forward with an alternative methodology to really use the cost of care as a primary target to inform reimbursement rates versus market rates. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And then, Commissioner, I will turn to you for some actually really good news about the price limitation waiver.
Really great news. This is like the commissioner always gets to deliver the good news part of the conversation. This whole conversation is good news, but this is particularly, there have been many of us who've been advocating, and long before I got back to EEC, if people are familiar with the price limitation waiver, it's a state rule that basically says, we can't charge, if you're taking state funds, you can't charge a private paying client less than you would be charging the state for the same service. And in a functioning market, that law makes sense. But we are not a functioning market in childcare. And so the result of that meant that many providers that were providing discounts to families or to staff would not be able to do that if we moved forward on large scale rate increases. So they would have to match the rate increase for their private pay parents. And that was really affecting affordability for a lot of our programs. And we've been operating under a waiver from the Operational Services Division last year that we got that approved one more year. But they've been saying all along, this is not something that should be done on a year-to-year waiver basis. If we want the childcare market to be excluded from this rule, it really needs to be a legislative change. Haley Driscoll administration proposed it. It was in the closeout supplemental budget that just passed. And so we are officially excluded going forward statutorily from the price limitation law. And that is really good progress for us. That doesn't mean we don't have a lot of work to do to think about what that means for private pay families that are paying lower than the rate and access for them. And I know even in our school age world, we have some challenges, but this is a huge policy victory for our field and just a giant relief off of we had a lot of finger waving at us. This was going to be the last year that they were going to allow a waiver. So we are enormously happy and very relieved. So thank you to all of you who also participated in communicating and advocating around the importance of this change. So it's good progress here. All right, Amy, back to you.
Okay. We can go to the next slide, Ashley. So I just wanted to highlight, and this is very high level, a few key takeaways from all of the cost research that we've been engaged in, and the sort of full cost study with all the details is on our website under reports. If anyone is interested, I'm also happy to answer any questions about this at the end. Again, we engaged with an external team who used a lot of different data sources to develop sort of what it costs for a program to operate. And what they found, first of all, which is not surprising, is that in most cases, the cost of care, assuming current compensation levels, is higher than our current childcare financial assistance reimbursement rates, especially for infant and toddler care. And next, and probably most relevant to this discussion of rates this year, although the cost of operating a program does vary across regions, the costs don't vary nearly as widely as our current rates. So as you can see here, the current rates, for example, in our Metro Boston region, are over 50% higher than the rates for Western Mass, whereas the cost between these regions varied by a little less than 20% for kids under the age of 5, and even less for school-age children. And another really important finding is that some of our regions that currently have different rates actually have very, very similar costs. In particular, Western, Central, and Southeast had very similar costs in our 2 Boston area regions, based on, again, a bunch of different economic data that the cost researchers looked at. Next slide, please. So some of the recommendations that they presented to EEC and the board from the cost study in terms of how we should think about this in the context of our rate structure, again, is really emphasizing, first of all, that although we know economic diversity exists and should inform reimbursement rates, the cost research and data does not necessarily support having as many different rates as we currently do. And as I just said, there are some regions that are especially close in the cost of care, and therefore there's really an opportunity to consider simplifying the rate structure by potentially consolidating and reducing the number of different rates. Based on several analysis that the researchers conducted using indicators from, again, federal data, also looking at median household income in Massachusetts, they suggested that, again, having potentially 2 or 3 different rates makes more sense than the current 6. And also, really, we've been thinking a lot about using the data we have to inform, as the commissioner said at the beginning, more equitable rates by region, by age, by type of care, and have been particularly focused on addressing some longstanding geographic inequities. Next slide, please. And I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but I did just want to make everyone aware that we, again, are intending to move forward with an alternative methodology. Hopefully our proposal will be approved by the federal government soon. And the federal government has been really strongly encouraging states also to try to move forward with a more cost-informed approach, and is offering some more flexibility to states that are doing so in terms of some of the requirements for data collection for the sort of the next phase of the work. So fingers crossed that we will be successful on that. Next slide, please. So Commissioner, do you want to take this or do you want me to continue?
Why don't you can go ahead and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, so we've really been doing a lot of work on, again, using a data-informed approach and strategy for rate increases and rate structure reform for this fiscal year and beyond, and are this year really balancing multiple goals, which again, we can talk a little bit more specifically about in a minute. I think first of all, recognizing all programs are facing increasing operational costs, which can be addressed through some portion of the funds that are available for rate increases being used for a cost of living adjustment for all of our rates. Second is using the extensive data we have and what we've learned about the cost of care to, again, potentially simplify the rate structure and address inequities, which could include consolidating rates for regions that are similar and making progress towards rates covering the cost of care. We are continuing to obviously keep track of and make sure that we're making progress towards the federal market rate benchmarks. And finally is really supporting and acknowledging sort of the cost of quality in terms of integrating quality funding into our base rates moving forward, and really recognizing the cost of implementing our robust licensing requirements.
And that's the last slide, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I think we can stop sharing. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit through what we're doing next with this information. So, as Amy said, we recognize that the cost that there needs to be a cost of living adjustment across all of the rates. So our first order of business, as we think about the proposals we'll be bringing to the board on Wednesday, is to make sure everyone gets some increase. And then we feel strongly and agree with many of the recommendations coming out of the cost study that a consolidation, not of the regions, but of the rates themselves to align to greater economic indicators makes sense. So we are planning to present 3 options to the board on Wednesday for their consideration. With our plan is that they will, and you all will have a chance to marinate in those options, and that they will vote at the January board meeting. So we've looked at three different options that consolidate rates to align better to geographic coherence and also to the economic indicators. So we're going to be proposing 3 set of options. One would be a consolidation to 2 rates statewide. One would be a consolidation to 3 rates statewide, and one is a consolidation to 4 rates. And the important thing to know is there's a direct relationship between how much we can do in a COLA or an across the board increase and how much we can do in consolidation. So the more you do in one, the less you can do in the other. So the 2 rate consolidation, for example, which would have basically, let me start with a 4 rate consolidation. So the 4 rate consolidation, which would basically keep, which would fold together the Southeast, Western Mass, and Central Mass into a single rate, would see, and everyone would be increased to the highest rate in the existing region across those 3, plus the cost of living. We would keep Metro Boston and Boston separate and the Northeast separate. And then we would be able to do a higher percent across the board. The 2 rate option, the 2 consolidation, means most of our funding would go into consolidating the rates. And so the board will have a chance to consider these, but the agency is going to be recommending a 3 rate option, which would enable effectively the Southeast, Central Mass, and Western Mass to be a single rate, Metro Boston and Boston to be a single rate, and the Northeast to stay separate. Again, based on the economic indicators that the cost study looked at, the costs in those regions really are more unique and aligned. So Central, Southeast, and Western, much more common in terms of the costs that we're actually seeing. Metro and Boston, also very common in the costs that we're seeing. And Northeast is quite unique in its setting. So we're going to be recommending, it sort of falls down the middle. There'll be something like a 5.5% across the board increase plus a consolidation. And the consolidation would result in pretty significant increases for the Southeast, West, and Central Mass, which is where we really see over time inequities have been created between a cost-based increase and a market-based increase. So everyone is going to get an increase across the board. We're going to simplify the structure, and we're going to do what we really look at as a one-time, really critical leveling of the playing field around the rates to better reflect where the costs are for the programs that are serving kids across the Commonwealth. We feel really strongly that this is a positive move forward. We are so thrilled that we have $65 million to be able to do that this year. We wouldn't be able to do something as significant and transformative if we had sort of less, or we were trying to take it on year by year or year over year. But again, the sort of weighing the options between consolidating rates to bring and address equity issues between really the Eastern and Southeast and the Central part and Boston, Metro Boston, and the ability for us to also make sure that there's some increase for every rate. The other thing that we'll be presenting to the board is a look at the 2 years together. So with an $80 million increase last year that leaned heavily into the market rate, you saw some of the regions get quite significant increases and some get less. This will effectively reverse that a little bit. So last year you saw some of the existing regions get significant increases associated with trying to reach that benchmark of at least 30th percentile of the market. This year we're leaning into the cost data to better bring up rates to reflect costs. So 145 million over 2 years, and we'll be able to present the data to show what the cumulative rate increases are associated with the 2 years of historic levels of increases. So, all right, I know it's hard to react but not seeing the data, but we will have it available at the board meeting. There'll be a lot of detail. There'll be a big appendix, which will include adjusted rates that by age group and region for each of the different options. So people will have an opportunity to dig into the data and see both sort of what it means statewide in terms of our commitment to equity and kids and access for families across the Commonwealth, and also what it means to you and your programs in the communities in which you're operating. Let me stop there. Amy, Jocelyn.
Yeah, and Commissioner, as you just said, we are talking about consolidating geographically. There will continue to be different rates for each age group and for provider types. So those will remain sort of in the current structure. But when the sort of 3 rate, 4 rate, 2 rate is a geographic consolidation, sort of keeping the structure of age and provider type.
And in some cases, we're also, you'll also be able to see that because the cost, like for infant care in Western Mass was the rate was very low relative to the cost of care, that there'll be a big increase in that, for example. Okay. Michelle, go ahead.
Thank you. This is all very exciting to see overall, though really looking forward to diving into the numbers once we have them. But seeing as we're already quite delayed in FY24 because of the budget process that took a little longer this year than it typically does, and so we know we're already a little further into the year of getting rates out than we are. Is there going to be a process? I understand giving the board some time to look over these options, as they do seem quite different from one another. Will there be a process kind of once the board goes through a vote in January to kind of expedite as soon as that vote comes through, get those rates out the door right away as soon as the vote comes through? Because I know already by January we're already quite later than programs are used to receiving their rate increases.
Yes. It's a great point. Yeah, we were trying to balance time for the field to absorb what is a pretty transformative change, and also the board to absorb that with like, oh my God, we need to get the money out, and I know you need it, and you need to get it into the hands of your staff. So we will work to expedite the increases and get those out as quickly as possible. Let me just mention 2 other things I forgot to mention. One is anything we do on the family child care side is subject to negotiations with 509. So I need to say that too, that we're going to be making these proposals to the board, but is also subject to our negotiations with our union representing family child care providers. So that there's an interplay between the board's action and our negotiations. And the second thing is We are also recommending an increase in the add-on for supportive, although that may change through the new procurement. So $1 increase in the daily for our priority populations, and that the family childcare systems rates would also follow the same order of adjustments. So if they were to be consolidated, there was a question in here whether in the consolidated options would the new rates be the highest existing in the geographic group. The answer to that is yes. And so for family childcare, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, I think that's right. And then so for family childcare systems, they would get a COLA increase, and then they would get the same, whatever the consolidation option is that the board ultimately decides on. The family childcare rates within those regions would also be subject to the same higher rate associated with the consolidated group. Sorry if that was like too many words and complicated. Laura, go ahead.
Actually, you answered my question, Commissioner. Sorry for pulling it down relative to FCC. I do continue to have questions about overall increase to FCC provider rates. I'm not speaking about the system here, provider rates, and looking at, let me step back and applaud the regional equity move, but there is also a question of the prototype equity rule. And while they are different, the gap has gotten very large in certain regions. So I think there's some equity issues that may or may not be solely met by collective bargaining, and maybe, anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Amy, do you want to take that in terms of how the analysis looked at prototypes and the cost looks at and the cost data?
In terms of family childcare? Yeah, again, we are, the cost models are, we looked at center-based and family childcare separately, and really, again, included tried to capture all of the key cost drivers. And I hear your concern also just about, continuing to focus on and attending to sort of where the rates are and inequities that sort of may have built up over time in terms of different provider types. So that makes sense as well.
I mean, one of the things we'll be talking about with the board, for example, so this will also move the dime on like how many providers are closer to the cost, right? Which is very good. It's not getting everyone to the full cost, and even our work around family childcare costs is unique and something that we're going to continue to improve on. But one of the things I've heard from family childcare providers, maybe yours, Laura, is just that the under 2 over 2 is something that in the future we might want to take a look at, right? Like in center-based, it makes sense when you go from toddler to preschool, the ratios change, but in family childcare, the ratios don't change under 2 over 2. So maybe there are some lower costs associated with serving older kids. Maybe it's the other way around. I think, we have a whole list of for future considerations, like getting closer to the cost, studying the cost, understanding what the consolidation will have resulted in. We want to look at family friend and neighbor care rates. There's a lot of future work. This is a big one-time level the playing field equity adjustment that is long overdue, that I'm really thrilled to be able to be bringing to the board and bringing to all of you for consideration. And there's much more work to be done around the rates. So we won't take our foot off the accelerator in terms of understanding how to continue to bring greater equity and understanding to what the true cost of care is and how that's reflected in the rates that we're setting and bringing.
Right. And I appreciate that, Commissioner. And I just want to say this is a huge amount of work, and the team is to be absolutely applauded for these huge step forward around overall rate equity, as well as the regional and geographic rate equity. So thank you to the team.
Yeah, they've done a really tremendous job. So I'm excited for you guys to see the details of the work they've done. Thoughtful, smart.
I also see another comment, Eve, from you, and about sort of the cost of care, which again, when we're sort of presenting the details next week, we'll be looking at the extent to which we can achieve the cost of care, assuming current compensation levels. But also, I think some of the future discussion, sort of thinking about what the threshold should be for the cost of care, and our cost models allow us to look at, again, targets that would assume, you know, a more aspirational compensation level, benefit level, that we can also compare our current rates to understand where those gaps are.
Okay, other thoughts, questions, and again, you know, we'll have a chance to dig into this between the meetings, and we'll be, you know, available to talk about it and dig into some of the details if needed. Oh, thanks,
Amy.
Eugenie. Yeah.
It's the other Amy. I have a question about so what is the board actually voting on? You're going to promote, you're going to share proposals, and then what happens?
So the board is, you know, they have some clear statutory responsibilities, and how we set rates is one of theirs. So, so on Wednesday, we will be presenting the options that I just laid out, and recommending that the board take action on one of those. And then the agenda is planned for discussion this month and a vote in January to pick the option to authorize the agency to move forward with the rate increase, you know, pursuant to whatever of the selected options they end up supporting as a board.
And then how does this discussion connect with any federal discussion or kind of things that we have to do for that?
Well, you know, all of the proposals will help us move more towards the 50th percentile. I think, and I don't think any of them get us 100% to the 50th percentile. And some people are more worried about them coming in and doing the potential impact of us not meeting the 50th percentile is financial. That can take a long time. So we can be found to be out of compliance with a federal requirement. Now that 50th percentile is predicated on the agency using the market rate survey and not an alternative methodology. So the federal government has not yet established a standard for the states who are using alternative methodologies, of which I think there's just 2 or 3 right now, right? So New Mexico, DC, Colorado.
New Mexico, DC, and Virginia. Yeah.
And Virginia. Yeah. If you consider DC a state. So they haven't yet set a threshold there. So we're sort of in a foot race around the alternative methodology. So our hope is we get our alternative methodology approved in time. That's what we'll be using the next time around, and we'll be relieved finally of this these market rate restrictions and requirements. So I believe we'll be able to do that, but there's other folks who appropriately on staff are worried about the timing and how to make sure we line those things up. But I believe we'll be able to get those things kind of lined up in a way. And our federal partners they're not, you know, they're with us on this. They want to see rates increase. They want to see greater access. They'd like to see states moving to alternative methodologies. So they're not interested in turning around and slapping us with a big fine because 7 of our rates are still below the 50th percentile. So I imagine they're going to continue to be good partners with us in helping us get to an approval on the alternative methodology, and hopefully giving us some grace on the rates that remain below the 50th percent of the market. Is that fair, Amy?
Yeah, the message has really been that to focus on making progress, and I think that we will be able to show, regardless of the option, significant progress. So the table I showed, which is like, here's where our current rates are, we will see a significant number of rates exceeding 50th that aren't currently. So the hope is that, again, we're sort of balancing that goal with the goal of wanting to also focus on costs, because that's the strategy for moving forward.
Well, and also let me add our thanks and appreciation for this work. We know how complicated and kind of intense this can be. So thank you.
Thank you. Kate.
So two things. First of all, I wanted to say thanks too. I mean, we all want all children to get a quality education, and we know that rates drive quality. And so to be equal, leveling the playing field geographically, I think huge kudos and lots of work. My question is, when you were thinking about the 2-rate versus 3-rate solution, what drove you to the 3, just out of curiosity?
Sure, I'll start and then Amy, correct me. So the economic indicators that across the regions is probably the primary thing, meaning in the 3-rate option, the Southeast, the West and Central are most similar in terms of the cost of what we saw. Northeast unique, Metro Boston and Boston more similar than different. So that really drove kind of our recognition that the 3 different rates is probably the most evidence solid. There's also, the more you consolidate, the less you can give an across the board. So if we were to promote the 2 consolidation, it would limit in some ways the areas that weren't as affected by increases by consolidation and limit the amount. And I think
So the
we
5% would go to like 3% or something, is what you're saying. Okay.
Exactly. And that is just below what we know inflation and the costs are out there. So we felt like it was kind of finding the middle ground between really leaning into the cost information, as well as making sure that all rates would be able to be increased at some percentage that was meaningful.
Great. Okay. I just was curious.
Yeah. And for the 4-1, we presenting that because it does allow for a greater across the board, which just to us feels like it perpetuates some of the continued inequities instead of moving closer. And I do think, I'm not sharing this news for the first time that we're going to be going into an economic, probably a different kind of economic environment than we have in the past. So I think taking the opportunity to make the consolidations and now, but we can always go to 2 in the future if we decide that's the right way to go. So again, I think this is going to be a journey, a multi-year journey to get to where we want the rates to be. So this feels like really significant progress in the right direction for this year, for the amount of funding that we have, and allows for further work. Other questions or thoughts? This is not the meeting I thought would end early, but I know we haven't given you the details, so I really am grateful for you engaging with us in this conversation kind of conceptually, because this is such an important stopover before we get to the board meeting. But invite, we will, Heidi, please. Oh, and you had an EOS comment too, I saw in the chat that we didn't get to,
So my EOS comment was just, it's amazing. The funding is fabulous, but it's also a lot of work. So it's something that I cringe to think about how much work it would be for a family child care provider to need to manage all of that work plus running their own program without additional assistance. That just boggles my mind. And already they are impressing me with their skills and dedication. So just that was sort of a side note from that perspective.
Right. So how we design it needs to be, first of all, we have to make it easier for the center-based program. So you have the chair of the board here listening to that, and we're committed to that too. But for family child care, definitely.
Yeah. And then relating to the rates itself, this is also very exciting work. And I know that there's been tons of time and effort that have been put into this, and thinking a little bit about what Eve had mentioned, as well as just trying to manage running programs. And with the benefits of the C3 funds, having some consistent funding that we can count on from 1 month to the next really makes a difference, regardless of what our attendance or enrollment looks like. So there are times that our enrollment fluctuates, especially when we are working with families who are receiving subsidies or financial aid. So, but our staffing, the goal is not to have that fluctuate. So if we want to have consistent staff and high quality, well-trained educators and program leadership, the thinking about as movement continues and hopefully additional funding continues, to think about funding more from a programmatic group classroom, however, perspective, and less on the individual child's perspective would really help the sustainability and the structures of the programs. My preschool classrooms expenses do not change whether I have 15 kids in them or 20 kids in them, but but the revenue that is available to support that significantly shifts. So obviously it's a long process, and this is a great step to help things move forward. I just don't want to lose that thinking.
And our commitment to paying on enrollment. I know that's not the same as, it's one step closer.
Without a doubt, there's lots of things that are really exciting.
Attendance really disrupted your funding model.
Yes.
Enrollment a little bit better.
That is definitely better.
On capacity, yes. I hear you saying capacity even better, which is a lot of why the C3, the brilliant minds, which were not mine, that designed the C3 program really thought about capacity, although enrollment is a really important part of the accountability of that program as well. So the other thing I just want to say is like, it's partly why we've been continuing to just consistently talk about the dual levers, right? Direct funding to the programs that can support you in sustaining a healthy financial model and without necessarily passing on additional costs to parents, and the purchasing power of families, which is what the rates are helping us address, both program stability and financing, but really pushing on the purchasing power of families, while also pushing on the stability and operational grants, which the C3 strategy and facilities and other things represent kind of as well. Your question made me think of something else we wanted to make sure that you were all aware of, because we are, as you know, in the midst of working on the re-procurement for the contracts, which provide a little bit more stability in programs than a voucher, for example. Those contracts, as you know, have not been redone since 2009 and 2010. So we will be issuing a request for information for our contracted providers, so that it'll be somewhat simple, but it'll be focused on a lot of the questions that we've all been raising together. How do we create greater flexibility? How do we use it to create stability? How do we use it to incentivize and support more care in areas where we really have low capacity, like infant care? How do we make sure we're providing the right supports for our priority populations, particularly our DCF families? What does that look like? So we will be issuing, I think early next week, a request for information that will feed the request for proposals that we are still aiming for in February, with new contracts starting in July.
Is that where the cost of quality is going to get because you mentioned earlier, is that where the quality piece is coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to ask you to tell us what are there different requirements we should have in the contracts around quality, because we're buying a whole classroom, or we're buying 15 kids or whatever it is. And I think we're interested in hearing from you. We've had some conversations internally, and can we ask more of you, that because we're giving you a contract, then we could ask if you're getting a voucher. And what does that mean in terms of equity for families too? So and also just knowing that no matter that, even with the rate increase we're talking about, we're not going to be meeting your cost of care. So we will be interested in hearing from you what you would like to see around quality requirements. Jocelyn, did you want to jump in?
No, I think I just wanted to add that the only real shift is the fundamental understanding that you have to have the money to invest in the quality. The approach of get to quality and then get paid after the fact has, I think, been what has been proven troublesome for programs. But absolutely, I think what we need to think about is sort of what are the investments that we want to see, and then how do we make sure that we are providing the funding to support those investments.
We're hoping the RFI will go out next week. Sorry, I was answering Kim's question in the chat. All right, other
Amy, can I just
hopes
say,
and dreams for us? Yeah, go ahead.
well, so I think, like all this, around the 50%, we know like we'd like to get to higher. So any thoughts about that? Recognizing that this is such an important part of the step. And then, but what does it look like kind of as we work together on this bigger vision around?
Are you talking about the 50th percentile?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I sort of hope we move away from that and start looking at costs. So what you'll see when we present on Wednesday is how far the new rates will get us towards the cost of care. Versus we are, as Amy said, your words, we are attending to the 50th percentile because that is the standard we are being held to today. But hopefully that kind of goes away. So, I mean, I do think the market rate, going forward, we're not going to walk completely away from the market rate. We're going to guess that our alternative methodology will look at both, because obviously we want our families to be able to buy into the market in which they live, learn, and work. And so the market also gives us important information about what families can buy. In the market in which they're in. So there'll continue to be some attention paid to the market, but I think we'll be leaning more heavily into the cost and presuming that's going to help with our purchasing power for families.
And I think just around, if you think about the hearing, both the informational hearing at the legislature and the bill hearing in October, right? This question of like the financing, which Amy Kay, I know we've spent many years untangling, but so this and I think the cost is a good way to go, because we can talk all about what people are getting paid, but I think Heidi just said like it doesn't, like what it costs is more important. And that has been like just in the messaging, communicating, like why are parents paying so much and people are getting paid so little? So there's so much within these numbers, and I think the philosophy of where we're all trying to get to is important to kind of like in the context of this conversation. Because I think the disparities that exist now that have been like legacy are important to attend to, and getting to this next place of what are we really talking about here? And I think just reiterating and kind of doubling down on the C3, where that really was about looking at this equity, like, what does it look like across, but then what does it look like for everybody to get something as well? And then thinking about that in tandem with this conversation. So just want to put that out there.
Thanks. Eve, go ahead.
Yeah, I know this is a little off topic, but because of Kate's question, I'm wondering where the state is in terms of the quality rating and improvement system. When we're talking about quality, it's unclear today what that is for Massachusetts.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So we are looking back at lessons learned from the quality rating and improvement system that we had. I think that this contract opportunity is a great moment, and the conversation that we just had is a great moment to say, let's focus on what is the process by which programs get to quality. Let us make sure that we're investing adequately in supporting programs, in investing in the staff roles that are needed and the processes that are important to get to quality. So the ongoing continuous investment in continuous quality improvement involves a lot of people and a lot of ongoing time and thinking and planning and investment in professional learning. We can start there and map out those expectations and make sure that our system is supporting everybody in doing that, while simultaneously thinking about, okay, how are we measuring what we are accomplishing and making sure that we're all moving in the direction that we're trying to go in. So, that's where we are in mapping out where we would go to. I know that's not like, here's a vision for a whole new QRIS system, but I hope directionally that's helpful. And honestly, the place where I think it would be great to have people engaging in the conversation as well and providing thoughts on what that could look like.
Yeah, this is way in the weeds, but there's been this like one QRIS level left for infants. And in our proposal, we are just raising everyone up to that level. And so kind of putting to bed the last piece of that QRIS. So the proposal will also include just raising all the infant rates up to that QRIS level. Amy, did I say that right?
Yes, for the infant and toddler rates, incorporating that into the rates moving
Base.
forward. Exactly.
So I think, you know, as Jocelyn said, I think we're really interested in moving away from the QRIS and into something much more around continuous quality improvement that supports programs on an ongoing basis. Haven't totally defined that yet, though. Kim, go ahead.
Can I just restate that? So you're looking at getting rid of the add-on rate, but because everybody's going to essentially get it.
I just say we're going to incorporate it into the base.
Okay.
That's part of
Great.
the reform we're doing. So there isn't this separate and with that, get rid of the paper documentation process associated.
Yeah,
with
that's
that.
awesome. Thank you.
We've heard it's very burdensome and maybe not as meaningful as maybe
Exactly.
the meaningful administrative balance wasn't really there, and we know the infant toddler rates are just so that part of this reform gave us an opportunity to just raise everyone up to that level and get rid of that documentation process as we contemplate what comes next around
Definitely agree with that.
qualities. Great. That's good, because you all will understand exactly what that means, but yeah, it added a whole nother complication to it, but a good one, a good way to simplify.
Yes.
Okay, well, we've been down in the weeds and we appreciate you going down there with us. Both in the philosophy and the direction and equity and, addressing cost, and then in the weeds of what that's going to mean for individual programs. So we thank you for your time today and your thoughtful input, and we'll look forward once the details, we're able to share the details with the board and all of you to hearing your feedback and input. Always encouraging folks to come and provide testimony at the board in person or in writing. And we'll look forward to our next conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.